The morning sun filtered softly through the stained glass windows of the chapel, casting warm, golden hues over the floral arrangements. It should have been the happiest day of Claire Rowan's life. The air buzzed with quiet excitement as guests arrived, cameras clicked, and a string quartet played softly in the background. The bride, radiant in white satin, smiled as her maid of honor adjusted the veil. Everything was picture perfect, until someone screamed. In the groom's dressing room, just steps away from the altar, 32-year-old Evan Blake lay lifeless on the floor, his tuxedo stained with blood. One clean, precise stab wound to the heart. No struggle. No sign of forced entry. Just a dead man in a locked room, on the morning of his wedding. The chapel turned into chaos. Police cordoned off the scene, guests were ushered away in silence, and what was meant to be a celebration became a full-blown crime scene. But who would murder Evan Blake on his wedding day, and why? Evan had built a reputation as a sharp, confident businessman in Atlanta's fast-moving tech scene. Born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, he came from modest roots and had climbed the ladder with grit and charm. Tall, clean-cut, and always dressed to impress, Evan had an easy smile that won over investors and colleagues alike. But not everyone loved him. Claire Rowan, 29, was a successful event planner and owner of a boutique agency. Organized, graceful, and fiercely intelligent, Claire had poured her heart into their wedding. Their love story looked like something out of a magazine, two rising stars who seemed made for each other. But beneath the elegant surface, tension brewed. There was Claire's father, Frank Rowan, a retired Marine with a deep distrust of Evan. He never hid his belief that Evan was too slick, too polished, and not nearly good enough for his daughter. The two had clashed often, especially about money. Claire was funding most of the wedding herself, while Evan had insisted on controlling the budget, often overruling her plans with sharp corrections and veiled insults. Then there was Lydia Grant, a 31-year-old nurse and Evan's ex-girlfriend. Their breakup 2 years ago had been sudden and messy, but no one knew the full story. What raised eyebrows wasn't the end of their relationship, but how Lydia seemed to linger. She still lived in the same neighborhood. She still ran into Evan at the gym, the grocery store, occasionally the same cafes. Claire claimed she was over it. Evan insisted they had no contact. But police would soon learn otherwise. The first hours of the investigation focused on the three names that came up again and again: the rival, the father, and the ex. Frank Rowan had no alibi for the hour Evan was murdered. He'd gone for a walk, he said, to clear his head. But no one saw him. Security footage from the back parking lot showed someone matching his description moving near the chapel's side entrance. When questioned, Frank admitted to being near the room but denied entering. As for Lydia, her phone was mysteriously turned off during a critical 2-hour window that morning. And when detectives seized her laptop and phone, they found something chilling: hundreds of saved photos of Evan, many taken without his knowledge, and emails she had written but never sent. Some were romantic. Others were disturbing. One read, "You can't erase what we had. Not ever." But the case was far from clear-cut. Investigators scoured the dressing room. The stab wound was surgical in precision, no hesitation, no second strike. The murder weapon, a narrow-bladed knife, had been wiped clean and left in a trash bin across the building. CCTV caught a person in nurse's scrubs walking down the hallway around the time of the murder, but their face was obscured. At first glance, it seemed obvious: Lydia, the nurse, the ex, the obsessive. But the deeper detectives dug, the more twisted the story became. Because Evan Blake had secrets, more than anyone realized. And someone wanted those secrets buried with him. The deeper detectives dug into Evan Blake's life, the less idyllic it appeared. Beneath the polished exterior of a successful tech entrepreneur, they uncovered a man who had been living a double life. It started with the finances. Detective Amanda Griggs, the lead investigator, requested Evan's financial records. What they revealed was troubling. Evan's company, a data security startup praised in the media for its growth potential, was hemorrhaging money. Tax records showed discrepancies. Investor deposits had been funneled into personal accounts. Several large wire transfers were marked as consulting fees to shell companies that appeared to be fake. In short, Evan Blake was committing financial fraud on a significant scale. It explained the life insurance policy Claire hadn't known about, $2.5 million, signed only 6 weeks before the wedding, with her as the sole beneficiary. And it explained why he had pushed so hard to get access to Claire's event planning business, suggesting they merge finances as soon as they married. Claire had said no. She wanted to keep her business separate. Evan hadn't pushed it, at least not in front of others. But according to her emails, his tone behind closed doors was more manipulative. He'd accused her of not trusting him. He'd called her ungrateful. At times, he'd gone days without speaking to her. Detective Grigg started painting a new portrait of Evan, not as a charming groom-to-be, but as a man backed into a corner, trying to marry his way out of debt. And suddenly, everyone had motive. Claire's father, Frank Rowan, had warned her. His military discipline made him rigid, but not unloving. Friends recalled how he'd raised his voice at Evan during an engagement party, accusing him of using Claire. "She's not your financial bailout," he'd reportedly said. At the time, people had brushed it off as an overprotective father, but now it sounded like a prophecy. Frank had served in combat, trained in close-quarters defense. He knew how to deliver a clean, fatal strike. And his dislike for Evan wasn't a secret. But when detectives tested the footage from the side entrance of the chapel, something didn't line up. The timestamp didn't match Evan's estimated time of death. Whoever passed by in that hoodie wasn't near the room when the murder occurred. Frank might have been angry, but it was starting to look like he wasn't the killer. Then came the turn in Lydia's timeline. Digital forensics uncovered deleted GPS data from her car's tracking system. It placed her within 5 blocks of the chapel around the time of the murder. When confronted, Lydia claimed she had driven by, out of curiosity, wanting to see the wedding she hadn't been invited to. But nothing more. And yet, 2 nurses from her hospital said they saw her locker open that morning, her scrubs missing. When asked directly, Lydia became defensive. "You think I killed him because I missed him?" she snapped during questioning. "I loved Evan once. But I'm not crazy." Yet the photos on her laptop, the unsent emails, the quiet stalking, they all told a different story. And then came the most unexpected twist of all. A new witness stepped forward, a florist's assistant named Theo, who'd been setting up arrangements in the hallway the morning of the wedding. He remembered someone brushing past him in a nurse's uniform. Only one detail stood out: the person wasn't a woman. He was tall, Theo said. And nervous. Like he didn't belong. A male in a nurse's uniform. Carrying what looked like a rolled-up garment bag. Caught on camera. Face turned away. Moving quickly toward the groom's room, and then gone. Lydia had a close friend, Darren Hunt, a quiet, soft-spoken high school teacher. He and Lydia had known each other for over a decade, though most assumed they were just friends. He wasn't on the guest list. He hadn't been seen at the venue. And when police visited his home, he wasn't there. Detectives had a new name. Darren Hunt. 35 years old, a middle school English teacher. Quiet. Polite. The kind of man who blended into the background. Few friends. No criminal record. Always described as helpful by neighbors and harmless by co-workers. But Darren had a secret. He had been in love with Lydia Grant since they were teenagers. Everyone else saw their relationship as platonic, almost sibling-like. But Darren? He had never moved on. Never dated seriously. Never married. His loyalty to Lydia bordered on devotion. Detectives discovered that Darren had been quietly orbiting her life for years, picking her up from late shifts, running errands for her, even driving her mother to doctor appointments. Lydia had called him the only man who never disappointed her. And when Evan left her for Claire, Darren was there to pick up the emotional pieces. But while Lydia grieved, Darren stewed. A search warrant for Darren's apartment yielded chilling evidence. In a locked drawer were detailed maps of the chapel, including blueprints showing staff entrances and blind spots in security cameras. There was a receipt for a nurse's uniform purchased online. And most damning of all, a kitchen knife with a missing twin, part of a distinctive set sold exclusively at Lydia's apartment complex gift shop. DNA tests later confirmed it was from Lydia's kitchen. Darren had taken it weeks earlier. He hadn't just killed Evan. He'd planned to frame Lydia for it. Detective Griggs paced the floor of the briefing room as her team connected the dots. Darren had studied Evan's habits, his vulnerabilities. He had access to Lydia's belongings and knew about the emails and photos she'd stored. He even had access to her login details. She'd once asked him to help recover a lost password. With that, Darren had carefully planted a trail of obsession. He deleted some photos, added others. Forwarded drafts of Lydia's emails to a hidden account to make them look more threatening. Built a narrative of fixation. Then, on the morning of the wedding, Darren slipped into the chapel disguised in Lydia's scrubs. CCTV caught a quick glimpse, enough to track his path. He used a staff-only hallway to access the groom's dressing room. Inside, Evan barely had time to react. The stab wound, the forensics confirmed, was delivered from close range, precise, brutal, and swift. Darren left as silently as he arrived. He tossed the uniform in a dumpster miles away. Dropped the murder weapon in a trash bin inside the building. Then drove home and waited for the news to break. But his plan was already unraveling. Darren had underestimated how closely Lydia's movements would be tracked. How quickly the police would identify the wrong details in the CCTV footage. And most of all, he had underestimated the strength of Claire. Because Claire, still in shock, had told investigators something small but vital, Evan had been on edge that morning. He'd said someone had slipped a note under his door at dawn. It read, "She'll never love you. But I can protect her." The handwriting didn't match Lydia's. But it matched a birthday card found in Darren's apartment. Now, the evidence was undeniable. But the man himself? He was still missing. Police issued an APB. His car was spotted leaving the city that same morning. But his phone had been turned off, and no credit cards had been used. It seemed Darren had gone to ground. Until 5 days later, when he showed up at Lydia's door. It was just after midnight when Lydia Grant heard the knock at her door. She had barely slept since Evan's murder. Her name had been dragged through every headline. Online forums were flooded with speculation, dissecting her past, her emails, her face in every candid photo. Despite the chaos, she'd stayed in town, cooperating with police, maintaining her innocence, even as suspicion clung to her like a shadow. So when the knock came, her first instinct wasn't fear, it was exhaustion. She opened the door and froze. There stood Darren Hunt, pale, disheveled, eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and desperation. His hands trembled. His lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. "Darren," she whispered. He stepped inside uninvited. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said quickly, breathless. I needed to see you." Lydia backed away. "Where have you been?" "I've been watching," he said softly. "Making sure no one hurt you. But they're blaming you now." "I never wanted that." Her expression hardened. "Darren, what did you do?" He looked like a man unraveling. "I did what needed to be done. You don't understand. He was going to ruin you. And Claire. I had to stop him." Across town, Detective Griggs sat at her desk, reviewing evidence for court when her phone buzzed. It was Lydia. Her voice shook. "He's here." Within minutes, officers swarmed Lydia's street. Darren was still in the apartment when they arrived. He didn't resist. In fact, he seemed relieved. But then something unexpected happened. As they led him outside, Darren suddenly twisted toward Lydia, his face full of anguish, and reached for something in his coat. A struggle followed. One officer shouted. Another lunged. A gun went off. The bullet grazed Lydia's arm, a shallow wound. Darren stared in horror as she cried out. He dropped the weapon instantly and collapsed to his knees, shaking. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he whispered. "I swear. I just wanted them to listen." At the precinct, Darren confessed everything. It poured out in waves, how he'd watched Evan for weeks, memorized the layout of the chapel, and used Lydia's belongings to construct the illusion of obsession. How he believed, truly believed, that by killing Evan, he was protecting Lydia and Claire from a man who would destroy them both. He didn't love them, Darren said, eyes unfocused. He used people. That's all he did. I could see it. Lydia couldn't. Claire didn't want to. But I knew. I had to do something. Detective Griggs listened in silence, her pen motionless on the page. "And the shot tonight?" she finally asked. His voice cracked. "That was a mistake. I just wanted to scare the cops. Get them to back off. I'd never hurt Lydia. Never. But he had. Maybe not with a bullet. But with everything else." The physical evidence corroborated his confession. Forensics matched his fingerprints on the chapel's staff hallway door. Surveillance footage placed his car near the scene. The kitchen knife was confirmed to have come from Lydia's apartment. The case was airtight. But in Darren's mind, he still believed he'd saved someone. The courtroom was packed the morning Darren Hunt's trial began. Reporters lined the benches. Cameras were banned, but sketches of his pale face and sunken eyes soon circulated nationwide. Outside, protesters gathered, some calling him a monster, others bizarrely casting him as a tragic figure driven by misguided loyalty. Inside, the air was tense. Darren had been charged with first-degree murder, attempted assault with a deadly weapon, unlawful possession of a firearm, and attempted framing. But perhaps the most haunting element was the motive, a warped sense of protection masquerading as love. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Rachel Klein, wasted no time painting Darren as a manipulator who executed a cold-blooded plan. "He didn't snap," she told the jury in her opening statement. "He planned. He plotted. He rehearsed." This was not passion, it was calculation. Darren Hunt dressed in a stolen nurse's uniform. He used a knife taken from the woman he claimed to love. And on the day Evan Blake was supposed to say, "I do," Darren turned that chapel into a tomb. She emphasized the life insurance policy Evan had taken out, the financial fraud, and the layers of deception, arguing that Darren saw himself as a twisted hero saving the women from a man he hated. The defense, led by public defender Louis Mercado, offered a more complex picture. "Yes, Darren Hunt committed a terrible act," Mercado admitted. "But he is not a monster. He is a man whose perception of love, loyalty, and justice became tragically warped. He believed, however wrongly, that he was doing good." Mercado leaned into Darren's lack of prior violence, his quiet life, his diagnosed depression. A forensic psychologist testified that Darren showed signs of a delusional disorder, exacerbated by years of unrequited love and emotional isolation. "He didn't want to kill for revenge," Mercado said. "He believed he was protecting Lydia and Claire from a con man who preyed on trust." But the jury wasn't swayed. The facts were undeniable. Claire Rowan took the stand, composed but visibly grieving. She spoke about Evan's charm, how he swept her off her feet, and the slow realization that something darker lurked beneath. The financial manipulation. The growing distance. The sense that she was being pulled into something she didn't understand until it was too late. "I was going to marry him," she said, her voice tight. "But now I realize I didn't really know him. I don't know who I was about to share a life with." Then came Lydia. Her arm still bore a faint scar from the bullet graze, but her tone was controlled. "Darren was my friend," she said. "He was kind. He was there when I needed someone. But I never asked him to do this. I never wanted this." The courtroom fell silent as she looked directly at him. "You destroyed my life in the name of saving it." The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. They returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. When the judge pronounced a sentence of life in prison without parole, Darren showed no emotion, only a faint nod, as if he had expected it all along. As bailiffs led him away, Lydia watched him go, expression unreadable. Claire didn't look at him at all. The verdict rippled through Atlanta like an aftershock. News outlets labeled it the wedding day murder, and ran retrospectives on the case for weeks. Editorials debated whether Darren Hunt was a killer or a casualty of emotional neglect. Talk shows dissected the meaning of misplaced protection, while others focused on Evan Blake's secrets and the fraud he nearly got away with. For the people actually involved, the aftermath was far more personal. Claire Rowan disappeared from the public eye almost immediately. She sold her condo, shuttered her event business, and stopped returning calls. 1 month after the trial, she quietly left the state. Some said she moved to the Pacific Northwest. Others believed she went abroad. What was certain, she never visited Evan's grave. There was no grave to visit. Evan's parents, humiliated by the financial scandal their son had left behind, opted for cremation and a private memorial. His ashes were kept out of public view, and the family declined all interview requests. But the victims of Evan's financial scheme spoke up. Former investors, many of them retirees and small business owners, filed a civil suit posthumously against Evan's estate. Thanks to evidence uncovered during the investigation, some were able to recover partial losses. A judge later froze what remained of Evan's assets, ordering that proceeds be distributed among verified victims. It wasn't full justice. But it was something. Lydia Grant faced a different kind of exile. Though cleared of all charges, she couldn't escape the scrutiny. Job offers disappeared. Her apartment was vandalized twice. Friends dropped off one by one. Even in public, she noticed the glances, half pity, half suspicion. As if surviving the orbit of Darren's obsession made her somehow complicit. Eventually, she left too. She and Claire, surprisingly, stayed in contact. Bonded not by friendship, but by survival. A month after Lydia moved to Portland, Oregon, she posted a simple photo, 2 coffee mugs, a rain-drenched window, and a caption that read, "Starting over." That was the last she ever spoke publicly about the case. Detective Amanda Griggs sat at her desk late one evening, long after the files were closed. The case had made her name across precinct lines, but it hadn't left her. She often returned to one piece of evidence, the note slipped under Evan's dressing room door. "She'll never love you. But I can protect her." Slanted handwriting. Smooth pen strokes. A chilling mixture of devotion and delusion. It reminded her how close they'd come to blaming the wrong person. How a nurse's uniform and an unsent email could have put an innocent woman behind bars. How obsession, masked as love, could lead someone down a path so dark they could no longer see the line between justice and murder. She filed the note in a separate folder marked "Retained, Training Purposes." Because if any case could teach young officers about the dangers of assumption and the complexity of motive, it was this one. Years passed. The chapel where Evan Blake was murdered was eventually renovated. New paint, new carpets, a fresh set of vows spoken every weekend beneath the same archway. But the staff never forgot what happened there. Some refused to enter the groom's dressing room alone. Others transferred out quietly, unwilling to remain in a place forever haunted by a wedding that ended in blood. The story of Darren Hunt faded from headlines but lived on in quiet whispers, at schools, on message boards, in psychology textbooks. A man once seen as harmless had carried out a killing so calculated, it reshaped the lives of everyone connected to him. In prison, Darren kept to himself. He never granted interviews. Never appealed his conviction. He spent most days reading or in silence, occasionally tutoring inmates in literature. To the guards, he was unremarkable. To fellow inmates, he was a man best left alone. In his third year behind bars, he wrote a letter to Lydia. It was never sent. Inside, he described a dream he had of sitting beside her on a park bench, listening to wind in the trees, her head resting on his shoulder. The final line read, "I still believe I saved you. Even if you never forgive me." That letter was found in his cell after an altercation in the yard left him briefly hospitalized. Lydia never saw it. She never asked to. Claire Rowan rebuilt her life piece by piece. No more lavish events. No more social galas. She took a job designing community programs for women recovering from emotional abuse. No one who met her in her new life knew what she'd survived. She told only one person the full story, a therapist she saw weekly for over a year. In one session, she said something that stuck. "I thought I was marrying a man who loved me. Turned out, I was marrying a mirror. All charm, no reflection." She never dated again. Lydia Grant returned to nursing quietly, years after the scandal. In a new town, under a new name, she worked in hospice care, caring for those whose lives were ending rather than beginning. She told a coworker once, over coffee in the break room, that she didn't believe in fairy tales anymore. But she still believed in dignity. In grace. In letting go of people who swore they loved you but never truly saw you. Detective Amanda Griggs retired 10 years after the case. At her farewell dinner, someone asked what case stuck with her most. She didn't hesitate. "The wedding," she said. Someone asked if she had regrets. "Just one," she replied. "That we didn't see Darren coming sooner." And so it ended, not with a bang, but with silence. A life taken. A secret exposed. A killer revealed not in rage, but in devotion turned deadly. In the end, it wasn't the victim who shocked the city. It was the protector. The one who thought love meant control. That protection meant violence. That devotion, no matter how twisted, was enough to justify murder. But love isn't a weapon. And protection isn't possession. And justice, though it came too late, finally found its way through the chapel doors.